The Queen Who Learned to Serve, The Life of Elizabeth II. On a quiet April morning in 1926, a little girl named Elizabeth Alexandra Mary was born in London. No one could have known that this small, cheerful child would one day become one of the most famous women in the world. She was not born expecting to become queen. Her father, Prince Albert, was the second son of King George V. Elizabeth's older uncle, Edward, was first in line to the throne. For young Elizabeth, life was therefore rather ordinary for a princess. She loved horses, dogs, music, and spending time with her family. She was shy but determined, and she was known for taking her responsibilities seriously even as a child. Elizabeth's younger sister, Margaret, was her closest companion. The two girls grew up together, playing in the gardens of their homes and enjoying a childhood that seemed far removed from the enormous responsibilities that awaited them. But history had other plans. A crown she never expected. In 1936, when Elizabeth was only 10 years old, her grandfather, King George V, died. Her uncle Edward became King Edward VIII. Elizabeth was now closer to the throne, but she still did not expect to become queen. Then came a dramatic shock. Edward wanted to marry Wallis Simpson, an American woman who had been divorced. At that time, the marriage created a constitutional crisis. Edward was faced with a terrible choice: remain king and give up his marriage, or give up the throne. He chose love. In December 1936, Edward abdicated. Suddenly, Elizabeth's father became King George VI. And Elizabeth, at just 10 years old, became the heir to the throne. The little princess who had once imagined a quiet life suddenly carried a great responsibility on her young shoulders. Her father taught her that being a monarch was not about power or privilege. It was about duty. That lesson would remain with Elizabeth for the rest of her life. A princess during war. Only a few years later, another great challenge arrived. In 1939, Britain entered the Second World War. Elizabeth was just 13. The war brought fear and uncertainty to millions of people. Cities were bombed, families were separated, and children were evacuated from dangerous areas. Elizabeth and Margaret were sent to Windsor Castle for safety. Although they were young, the princesses wanted to contribute to the national effort. In 1940, Elizabeth made a radio broadcast to children who had been evacuated from their homes. Her message was simple: even though people were separated, they should remain brave and hopeful. It was one of the first moments when the young princess spoke directly to the public. And she was not content simply to watch the war from a palace. When she turned 18, Elizabeth insisted on doing something useful. She joined the Auxiliary Territorial Service, where she trained as a driver and mechanic. Imagine it, a future queen sitting behind the wheel of a military vehicle, learning how to repair engines and change tires. She was determined to serve her country like everyone else. When the war ended in 1945, Elizabeth and Margaret famously joined crowds in London to celebrate victory in Europe Day. For a few hours, the princesses were able to experience the joy of ordinary people celebrating the end of a terrible war. It was a precious memory for Elizabeth. But another important chapter of her life was beginning. The prince she loved. In 1947, Princess Elizabeth married Lieutenant Philip Mountbatten, a Greek and Danish prince who had become a British citizen. Their wedding was a moment of hope after years of war and hardship. Elizabeth wore a beautiful wedding dress, but Britain was still recovering from the war, so she saved clothing coupons to help pay for the materials. The young couple began their married life together, and Elizabeth soon became a mother. Their first child, Prince Charles, was born in 1948. Princess Anne followed in 1950. For a time, Elizabeth enjoyed a relatively private family life. But the crown was waiting. The unexpected queen. In February 1952, Elizabeth was visiting Kenya with Prince Philip when terrible news arrived. Her father, King George VI, had died. Elizabeth was now queen. She was only 25 years old. She returned to Britain, no longer simply Princess Elizabeth, but Queen Elizabeth II. On June 2, 1953, her coronation took place at Westminster Abbey. Millions of people listened to the ceremony on the radio, and millions more watched it on television. The young queen promised to dedicate her entire life to the service of her people. She did not know then that she would keep that promise for more than 70 years. A changing world. Elizabeth's reign began during a period of enormous change. The British Empire was transforming. Countries that had once been part of the empire became independent nations. The world was recovering from war, entering the Cold War, developing new technologies, and experiencing enormous social changes. And through all of it, Elizabeth remained a constant figure. She met presidents, prime ministers, kings, queens, scientists, artists, athletes, and ordinary citizens. She traveled across the world and visited countries throughout the Commonwealth. But one of the most remarkable things about Elizabeth's reign was not simply how many places she visited. It was how many generations she connected. When she became queen, people still listened to the radio more than they watched television. Computers were enormous machines used by specialists. Air travel was a luxury. There were no smartphones, social media, or internet. By the end of her reign, the world had been transformed. Elizabeth herself changed with the times while maintaining a sense of tradition. The Queen and her family. Of course, royal life was not always peaceful. Elizabeth experienced family joys and family difficulties in public view. She became a grandmother and later a great-grandmother. She watched her children grow up, marry, and raise families of their own. She also experienced painful moments, including the breakdowns of some royal marriages and intense media attention. Perhaps the most heartbreaking event came in 1997. Princess Diana, the former wife of Prince Charles and mother of Princes William and Harry, died in a car accident in Paris. The death shocked the world. Millions mourned Diana. The royal family faced enormous public emotion, and the Queen found herself having to balance private grief with her responsibilities as monarch. It was another reminder that being queen did not mean being untouched by sadness. A queen in the modern age. As the years passed, Elizabeth became more than a monarch. To many people, she became a symbol of continuity. She had seen 15 British prime ministers serve during her reign, from Winston Churchill to Liz Truss. She had met countless world leaders. She had witnessed the rise of television, the moon landing, the fall of the Berlin Wall, the growth of the internet, and the transformation of everyday life. Yet she continued performing the same basic duties, opening parliament, meeting officials, giving speeches, visiting communities, and representing Britain and the Commonwealth. She also had a wonderful love of animals, especially horses and her famous corgis. Behind the formal photographs and ceremonies was a woman who enjoyed the countryside, horse racing, and the companionship of her pets. The Platinum Jubilee. In 2022, Elizabeth II reached a remarkable milestone. She became the first British monarch to celebrate a Platinum Jubilee, 70 years on the throne. Across Britain and the Commonwealth, people celebrated her long reign. There were concerts, street parties, decorations, and ceremonies. But even at the age of 96, Elizabeth's health was becoming more fragile. She had spent 70 years serving her country. And she continued to work. Her final public duty came in September 2022, when she appointed Liz Truss as Prime Minister at Balmoral Castle in Scotland. Only 2 days later, on September 8, 2022, Queen Elizabeth II died peacefully at the age of 96. She had reigned for 70 years and 214 days. She was Britain's longest reigning monarch and the longest reigning female monarch in recorded history. The legacy of Elizabeth II. Elizabeth's story is not simply the story of a queen who wore a crown. It is the story of a girl who never expected to become queen, a young woman who learned to serve during wartime, a wife and mother, a grandmother, and finally a monarch who carried an extraordinary responsibility for more than 7 decades. She lived through a century of enormous change and entered a new one. She saw the world move from telegrams to smartphones, from black and white television to digital media, and from an age of empires to an interconnected world. Through all those changes, she held firmly to one idea: duty. She once promised that her whole life, whether long or short, would be devoted to serving her people. Her life turned out to be very long. And she kept her promise. Perhaps that is why, when people remember Elizabeth II, they do not remember only the crown, the palaces, or the ceremonies. They remember a small girl who unexpectedly became queen. A young princess who served during a war. A 25-year-old woman who accepted a lifetime of responsibility. And an elderly monarch who, even after 70 years, was still doing her duty. Her crown may have been placed upon her head in 1953, but her true legacy was built slowly, year after year, through service. And that is the story of Elizabeth II, the queen who spent her life learning that the greatest privilege was not to be served, but to serve.